He just hit my son with a golf club. That's what I screamed across the green, just seconds after my 17-year-old collapsed to the ground, blood pouring down his face. And standing at the edge of it all, the queen of the HOA, Karen Whitaker, arms folded, sunglasses on, smirking. She didn't flinch. She didn't call for help. She watched. And what she didn't know was, I trained federal agents for situations worse than this. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. I picked up my own club and I shattered his knee right there in front of her. If you've ever wanted to fight back against an HOA tyrant, this story is your rally cry. Welcome to HOA Karen Files, where justice swings back. Let me show you how one crooked nod from a Karen unraveled her entire empire, one swing at a time. HOA's attack dog. Hurt my son so I broke his knee in front of everyone. Glenwood Ridge. That place will chew you up, son. That was the first thing I thought, but not the first thing I said. Because when my boy jogged up the driveway with that hopeful grin and a practice wedge slung over his shoulder, I couldn't bring myself to crush it. He was 17. Clean swing, clean heart, and more fire in his gut than most men twice his age. His name was Eli, and golf was more than a game to him. It was his sanctuary. So when I found the envelope in our dusty old mailbox, I almost tossed it with the rest of the HOA flyers. Gold-trimmed, thick paper, and the Glenwood Ridge HOA seal, stamped like it was a royal decree. No name, no contact, just a single typed line. To the promising young athlete, Eli Carpenter. You are cordially invited to showcase your golf skills at the grand opening of Glenwood Ridge's prestige course. Then a date, a time, and a warning. Attire strictly HOA standard. Guests by escort only. It was signed only by a title. Office of the Chairwoman, HOA Executive Committee. I stood there on the porch staring at that letter as Eli trotted up. "What's that, Dad?" I showed him. He blinked. "Glenwood Ridge? Are you serious? That's the elite course, the one that doesn't even let local pros book a tee time without a blood sample. Apparently, you're on their radar now," I muttered. He looked like he couldn't believe it. And maybe he couldn't. Honestly, neither could I. Glenwood Ridge didn't do charity, and they sure as hell didn't do kindness. But Eli's eyes lit up like a kid who just found out Santa was real, and I knew there was no saying no. I was a father first, a realist second. So I swallowed the unease coiled in my gut and clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Let's go make an impression," I said. He grinned. But as we drove toward that gate a few days later, I couldn't shake one thing. Glenwood Ridge wasn't inviting us. They were setting the stage. And someone, somewhere, was holding the script. Someone named Karen. They say a lion doesn't snarl before it pounces. Karen Whitaker didn't raise her voice. She didn't glare. She didn't even fake a smile. She just looked. From the top of the clubhouse steps, framed by columns and cut stone grandeur, she stood like a monarch surveying her domain. Blazer the color of dry blood, hair sculpted into a platinum helmet, heels sharp enough to scar concrete. And flanking her like obedient hounds were two board members in pastel polos, sunglasses, and tight jawlines. My son and I had just stepped out of our truck, dusty, 15 years old, proudly American-made, and already we didn't belong. The Glenwood Ridge air was different, not just the crisp scent of over-fertilized turf and lavender hedges, but the way people carried themselves, like they were allergic to poverty, or worse, humility. Eli's shoulders were square, but I saw it in his jaw, that flicker of self-doubt. The way his fingers nervously tapped the edge of his golf bag, like he was trying to remind himself he did deserve to be here. And he did. I'd made sure of that. But Karen? Karen didn't think so. She whispered something to the man beside her. He was tall, thick-necked, arms like cinder blocks under that pale blue polo. He smirked, not openly, just a twitch of the lip, like something sour sat on his tongue, and he liked the taste of it. That was the first move. Not a word, not a welcome, just a look, a whisper, a smirk. We were directed, not invited, to park near the service lot. gravel, dumpster smell. A world away from the circular driveway lined with Teslas and Porsches where real guests were allowed to step out like royalty. The valet didn't even hide the sneer when he took one glance at our plates. "You here for the junior showcase?" he asked, eyes on the bird poop on our hood. "We're here by invitation," I replied, calm and even. He shrugged, already turning away. Eli and I walked the path ourselves through the side entrance, past the staff-only signs and maintenance carts. And there, on the perfectly edged patio of the clubhouse, we met her, officially, for the first time. Karen Whitaker didn't shake hands. Instead, she clasped hers in front of her waist like she was posing for a portrait and nodded once. "Mr. Carpenter," she said, each syllable clipped like she was biting them off with her teeth. "We pride ourselves on welcoming new faces into our community. This showcase is about excellence, exposure, and, most importantly, standards." Her eyes flicked to Eli. "Your son, I hope, understands that he's not just representing himself today." I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't touch the eyes. "He's here because you invited him." Her lips twitched, just a fraction. But in that fraction lived 1,000 unspoken threats. She turned to Eli. "Be mindful of proximity. The prestige circle is for members only." Then she gestured vaguely toward the far edge of the course. "You may warm up over there." Like we were being assigned a kennel. As we walked, Eli didn't say much, but I saw the way his fingers clenched and unclenched around his glove. He wasn't a kid who got rattled easy, but Glenwood Ridge was different. It didn't bark. It whispered, and it had teeth. "She talks like that to all guests," he muttered. "No," I said. "Only the ones she's scared of." He glanced at me, confused. "Scared? Of me?" I didn't answer. Not yet. But I knew what Karen feared. Not Eli. Not me. The idea that someone could step onto her turf and not need her permission, that was the real threat. At the far green, Eli started warming up. His swing was smooth, controlled, like water through silk. I'd seen it 1,000 times, but watching him here, on this pristine course, with strangers and loafers pausing mid-conversation to glance over, it hit different. By the third shot, a hush was starting to gather. By the fifth, someone clapped. It wasn't a loud clap, just one. But in a place like Glenwood Ridge, one clap might as well be a protest. Phones started coming out, discreetly. But not secretly. Karen, still stationed on her balcony perch, noticed. She stiffened. Then she leaned in, whispered, to him. I would later learn his name. Chase Donovan, HOA, head of training, whatever that meant. To me, he looked like a college linebacker who peaked at 23 and never emotionally recovered. His golf shirt was too tight, his watch too expensive, and his smile too wide to be trustworthy. He made his move like a man sent to do a job, swaggered across the green like he owned it, got too close to Eli. I stood. "Back off, Chase," I called. "He doesn't need a caddy." He turned, smile glued in place. "Just giving some encouragement." He had a club in his hand. And then, it happened. The sound was wrong. Not the thwack of driver on ball, not the hiss of turf. A crack, sickening, wet, sudden. The kind of sound you hear in accidents. Car crashes, street fights, fractures. Eli collapsed. Blood bloomed across his temple like spilled ink. I was already running before the scream started. The club in Chase's hand was still raised, and then dropped like nothing had happened. Karen descended slowly, like a queen surveying the aftermath of a rebellion. She didn't shout, didn't ask if Eli was okay. She said, "Oh dear, I did warn you this course isn't safe for amateurs." My blood froze. She'd watched it happen. She'd let it happen. I turned to her. "You let him swing." She shrugged. "Boys' roughhouse. Accidents happen." My son was bleeding on the grass, and Karen Whitaker was bored. You ever feel something inside you shift? Not break, not snap, just realign, like a weight shifting from one side of a seesaw to the other? That's what happened. I didn't scream, didn't threaten. I stood, walked toward the club rack. My hands were steady, my heart wasn't. but my purpose was. When I returned, 7-iron in hand, Chase was laughing. Kid's got a soft skull, he muttered to someone. Didn't think I tapped him that hard. Then he saw me. Hey, hey man, don't get dramatic. It was just crack. Steel met bone. His knee folded sideways with a sound I'll never forget. And for the first time, Karen screamed. You've lost your mind, she shrieked. I didn't answer. I dropped the club, pulled out my badge. State-certified law enforcement trainer, retired, federal oversight consultant, active. Her face turned to ash. That was the moment the room, the country club, the HOA, the illusion, cracked. Phones were out, cameras rolling. People weren't whispering anymore. They were watching, and Karen, for the first time she didn't have a script. The club hit the grass with a dull metallic thud. Karen stood frozen. One hand clutched the railing of the clubhouse steps. The other pointed at me like she still believed she could command something. Authority, attention, fear. But no one moved. Not the valet behind her, not the board members to her left, and certainly not Chase, who now lay screaming on the green, writhing like a deer hit by a truck. People stared, not at me, at her. You're going to be arrested, she shouted, mascara already smudging beneath her sunglasses. You assaulted a staff member on HOA property. I turned toward her. I know exactly what I just did, I said, voice flat. And so does everyone here. Gasps, whispers, phones raised. A dozen tiny cameras blinking like judgmental fireflies. Karen spun, trying to rally support. These people, she gestured wildly at the guests, they respect order. They respect leadership. What happened today was an act of madness. But no one answered. No one clapped. One man, elderly, quiet, leaned toward his wife and whispered, just loud enough to be heard. We saw the boy go down first. Karen's jaw locked. Her heel twisted against the turf like she was grinding out an insult. And then I stepped forward. You've manipulated this community for years, I said, my voice low but slicing. You fine veterans for their flags. You threaten children for lemonade stands. You bully single mothers over mailbox paint. And today you watched a man swing a club at a teenage boy. You didn't stop it. You smiled. That is slander, she spat. No, I replied, that's truth, and it's all on video. A woman by the champagne tent raised her phone higher. Got the whole thing, she called out. From her little nod to the swing. Karen's face paled, the kind of pale you don't recover from with bronzer. She turned to the board, her loyal crew. They were already stepping back, not saying a word, not defending her. Even Mrs. Hollins, her treasurer, her lapdog, her enforcer, was looking away. Karen's kingdom was cracking, and it wasn't from a speech. It was from truth. Chase was moaning now, hands still on his knee, swearing between sobs. A guest, an off-duty EMT, crouched beside him, eyes grim. Kneecaps done, he murmured. He's finished. Long rehab if he walks right again. He said it loud enough for Karen to hear. She winced, but I didn't flinch. I stepped onto the exact patch of turf where Eli had bled. Grass still stained, dirt still torn, and I said it again. You watched. You let it happen. I didn't order him to do anything, she snapped. That man acted on his own. You nodded. It meant nothing. Then why does the whole crowd know exactly what it meant? Her silence was louder than a confession. The HOA president had no more script to follow. She tried to pivot, always her fallback. This community thrives because of rules, discipline, structure. Without it, we're chaos. You hear that? I asked the crowd. She just admitted it. Her version of order is fear. Her version of rules is watching children bleed and doing nothing. The wind picked up, and with it, something else. Murmurs, voices, stories. A woman near the back raised her hand. She fined me $300 because my son's bike tire was 5 inches over the line in the driveway. Another joined in. She banned my daughter from the community center, said her shirt showed too much shoulder. She's 12. Then came more, and more, like floodgates opening. Karen spun, trying to outpace the collapse. "This is a witch hunt," she shouted. "Ungrateful, disloyal." I stepped beside her, not threatening, just present, and said the quiet part out loud. "Leadership isn't fear. It isn't control. And it sure as hell isn't smiling while a teenage boy lies broken in the grass." She turned to the HOA board again. They didn't meet her eyes. Even the bartender behind her, the one who'd handed her champagne 15 minutes ago, was now standing stone still, gripping the bottle like he wasn't sure who she was anymore. Karen tried to speak again, but no one was listening. People weren't facing me anymore. They were facing her, and the silence wasn't respect. It was the beginning of rejection. I took a deep breath, let it settle in my ribs, then raised my voice, not shouting, just loud enough for the truth to reach the back row. "This isn't about golf. This is about what happens when one person abuses power and no one stops them. Well, today that power snapped." A pause, then one clap, then another, then dozens. Karen didn't fall, but she staggered. In that moment, mascara running, hair undone, blazer wrinkled. She didn't look like a queen. She looked like a woman terrified of being seen without her crown. She turned, desperate now, toward Chase. He looked up from the grass, begging her with his eyes. She didn't even look back. That was all you needed to know. He was her weapon, not her concern. Security arrived then. Not HOA staff. Real security. Hired by the course, summoned by guests. They didn't ask questions, just cleared a path. One of them whispered something in Karen's ear. She shook her head, furious. But she stepped away. Finally, the retreat of the tyrant. I knelt beside Eli. He was conscious now, barely. The EMT was wrapping gauze, checking his pupils. "He'll be okay," she said softly. "But he's going to need rest, and you're going to need legal backup." I smiled. "Already working on it." I stood, pulled out my phone, and started calling. My lawyer, the police, the press. By sunset, Sausage or Justice for Eli was trending. The footage was everywhere. Her nod, Chase's swing, my retaliation, her cold reaction, the crowd turning. Glenwood Ridge had tried to script the perfect event, but instead they got a revolution. Karen tried to spin it. She told local news Chase acted alone, that Eli had been too aggressive, that I had overreacted. But the footage didn't lie, and neither did the crowd. The HOA's insurance company caught wind of the liability and moved faster than Karen could hire a PR firm. They froze her access, suspended her pending investigation, locked her out of the system she'd ruled for years. And just like that, her empire cracked. The next morning, the gates of Glenwood Ridge didn't open as slowly. They creaked, not physically, no rust on those digital mechanisms, but symbolically. The kind of creak that comes from a system not built to withstand what it just went through. For years, Karen Whitaker had controlled Glenwood Ridge like a monarch with a spreadsheet. Her laws weren't written in kindness. They were chiseled in fear. She ruled through citations, whispers, and cold perfection. And it worked, until it didn't. Until someone bled, until someone fought back, until the footage went viral. By mid-morning, 3 different local stations had called me. 2 asked for interviews. 1 just wanted to confirm it was real. I didn't need to convince them. The video spoke for itself. Karen's nod, Chase's swing, Eli collapsing, me walking calmly toward the club rack. The swing, the break, the silence. The internet has a strange way of deciding justice sometimes. It doesn't wait for courtrooms. It doesn't need depositions. It just knows. And Glenwood Ridge had become Exhibit A in a nationwide conversation about HOAs, about abuse of power, about what happens when the wrong people are handed authority with no oversight. By 10:47 a.m., Karen was officially suspended from all HOA activities, pending investigation. That was the official phrase. The unofficial phrase, she's done. Her key card, deactivated. Her email, locked. Her access to HOA funds, frozen. And worst of all for her, her status, gone. No more invitations, no more board votes, No more tight-lipped smiles from neighbors who feared her clipboard. I heard later that she tried to attend a community image meeting that afternoon. They wouldn't let her in. Security, real security, met her at the door and told her, plainly, "This isn't your meeting anymore." She stood there for 7 minutes, just outside in the sun, alone, then turned, got into her Escalade, and drove off without a word. At home, Eli was healing. His stitches were neat, his bandages clean, his pain manageable. But something deeper was shifting in him, in his posture, in his quiet. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't wanted to be a symbol. He just wanted to play golf. But now he was more than an athlete. He was the kid who stood tall while power swung wildly and still didn't flinch. That night he turned to me. His voice was quiet. "Did I ruin everything?" I shook my head. "No, you exposed everything they tried to keep buried." I meant it. Meanwhile, Glenwood Ridge, or what was left of its old structure, was on fire. Not literally, but politically, it was ashes. More residents came forward. Emails surfaced, screenshots, citations that made no sense, stories that had never been spoken aloud before. One family fined $400 because their toddler's toy left on the porch was visually disruptive. Another woman threatened with eviction for painting her front door unapproved turquoise, a color 2 shades off from the HOA's palette. A veteran told how Karen had demanded he lower his flag during a non-holiday week. Each story by itself felt like a paper cut. Together, they formed a gaping wound. A week later, the board, now operating under interim leadership, called for a full community vote. Single issue, simple ballot. Should Karen Whitaker be permanently removed from her role as HOA president? 91% voted yes. The other 9%, I'd bet most of them were her remaining circle, or too afraid not to abstain. Karen never showed up to the vote. Instead, she submitted a 3-line resignation letter by courier. "I hereby resign my position. I take no responsibility for the incident in question. I caution Glenwood Ridge against turning governance into theater. No apology, no ownership, just bitterness, wrapped in legal disclaimers." She moved out that night. Black SUV, curtains drawn. No farewell, no ceremony, just silence. And yet in that silence, something better grew. For the first time, the people of Glenwood Ridge, neighbors who had smiled through gritted teeth, who had whispered instead of speaking, who had paid fines instead of pushing back, began to talk, openly, loudly, honestly. They told stories. They questioned systems. They asked why they'd ever tolerated someone like Karen in the first place. And then they started changing things. 2 weeks after the incident, I got another envelope in the mail. This one was hand-addressed. Inside was a card. "We'd like to invite you and Eli back. This time, not as guests, but as family. Glenwood Ridge Interim Council." We returned, not through the side entrance, not to the gravel lot. No valet sneers. This time, we were met with applause. Eli didn't know what to do with it. He just stood there, stunned, as neighbors clapped and nodded and shook his hand. At the 7th hole, the one where it all happened, a small crowd had gathered. In the center, a bronze plaque. We walked up together. The plaque read, "Eli Carpenter, not just a golfer, a reminder that silence is never safer than truth." Next to it, a white flag fluttered in the breeze. Not HOA branded, not corporate, just a single word embroidered in deep blue: honor. Eli didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just stepped up, took a club from his bag, and hit one clean shot down the fairway. The ball soared, like the green itself had been waiting for that swing. And as I watched it fly, I realized something. Karen Whitaker had ruled with fear. But my son? He earned something she never could: legacy, not from power, but from pain, from standing tall, from refusing to back down. You'd think it ended with the vote, with Karen gone, with Eli healed, with a plaque, a white flag, and a clean shot down the 7th fairway. But the truth is, stories like this, they don't end. They echo. Weeks passed. The news cycle moved on. From Glenwood Golf Gate to the next scandal, the next viral reckoning. But in Glenwood Ridge, things had changed. People who once peeked from behind curtains now spoke in daylight. Neighbors who feared fines now organized meetings. Teenagers walked freer, louder. Families left bikes in their front yards, unlocked. It wasn't just about Karen. It was about everything she stood on, and how easily it cracked when one person decided not to play along anymore. The footage of Chase's swing had millions of views now. But the moment that mattered most to me wasn't when I shattered his knee. It was when Eli stood up, blood running down his face, eyes steady. He didn't scream. He didn't retaliate. He stood. That's the message. That's the swing that mattered. There's something about silence, the kind that festers, in neighborhoods, in classrooms, in boardrooms, in families. It becomes habit, a survival instinct. We let things slide. We excuse. We say, that's just how she is, or don't rock the boat, or it's not worth the fight. Until one day someone does fight, and suddenly we all remember what it feels like to breathe honestly. Karen Whitaker thought fear would keep her throne. What she didn't count on was that my son's blood would water something deeper, something real, community, courage, accountability. Eli never went back to Glenwood's junior program. He didn't need to. He had nothing left to prove to anyone, especially not them. Instead, he started coaching kids at a public course outside town, the kind without gates or dress codes or HOA committees hovering over tee times. He teaches them to swing, but more than that, he teaches them to stand. As for me, I still drive past Glenwood sometimes, just to see it. The place where fear once smiled behind clipboards. The place where a king's guard raised a club and a father raised something stronger. Let me ask you something. How many Karens do you know, not just in HOAs, but in life? Bosses who rule with threat. Relatives who use guilt like a scalpel. Officials who call silence order. People who smile when they know you can't fight back. Now ask yourself this. What if someone did? What if someone finally said, enough? Not with rage, not with revenge, but with truth sharp enough to break bone. That's what this story is really about. Not golf, not property lines, not even the bruise on my son's temple. It's about that moment we all carry when we know we've been pushed too far and we choose to stop kneeling. We choose to stand. So if you've ever been fined for speaking up, punished for not conforming, silenced for being honest, then let this story be your permission. You don't need a badge to be brave. You don't need a courtroom to demand justice. Sometimes, justice doesn't come with a gavel. Sometimes it comes with a 7-iron. Thank you for watching. If this story fired you up, made you clench your fists, or gave you a little more backbone than you had yesterday, smash that like button, share it with someone who's been pushed too long, and comment one word below, enough, because that's where change begins, with one word, one swing, one voice louder than silence.